one of the interesting points that I didn't raise when it came to the area of collegiality is in terms of what happens when you're in a situation that's a non-denominational or interdenominational institution, where you come in as a teacher, you hold your particular views. How do you express those, or what's appropriate within a classroom situation? Are you there to push your particular theological perspective, or because of the setting of an interdenominational college, then what's meant by that? And this is where talking together as faculty will be important, and knowing what's appropriate. So that's something that I'm glad it was raised, and I'll certainly make sure I build that into future times that I make this presentation. So you should have that handout and it's enhancing study skills. We're not going to do the session on assessment, but the article which I was going to give you, an article I wrote a little time ago about assessment, I was going to use, you're going to get this as your handout in any case, rather than the copies of the slides. Assessment and theological education, an appeal for theological and educational integration. This article here, and there are enough copies for each person because we were going to hand it out in any case. If you want to think about assessment, which we're not going to go into detail now, then this gives the gist of what I was going to cover in my session, if you want to take one of those. So we've done teaching for transformation. We are looking now at developing student study skills. And keep in mind still what you're hoping to have achieved by the end of today, and there'll be a chance to revisit that in about an hour's time. This area of the questions that I got that had arisen as you people were polled for what to include in a session like today were these 4 areas here, and they're the ones that are on your agenda. But the ones we're going to focus on particularly are these 2. How do we help students develop good study skills that will help them with the courses we teach, as well as helping them to become lifelong learners? And then secondly, how do we get them to read the readings? So we're not going to address plagiarism or collusion in particular. We're not going to directly address the issue of those who come with no tertiary education or poor secondary education experiences, but a lot of what we say, you could well make a link to those, because we're talking about students who come from a wide variety of backgrounds, and that includes their educational backgrounds. I wonder whether sometimes when you're a teacher, you feel a bit like this. And in a lot of areas, are you making any headway with the students? And perhaps you're feeling a bit like this. Well, I mean, I've assumed that you identify with the big guy, not the little guy. So how do we help our students develop good study skills, and how do we help them to read more? And again, as we've done before, what are some of the things that you've tried that actually seem to work? Just briefly, what are some of the strategies that you might have applied and encourage students in to help them develop their skills or to read more?
Model best practice.
Model best practice, okay.
Can I say that's a very good question, like with adult students that's come in, and we have a model here, like sort of like academic and university kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then we expect these adult students who have no idea about academics,
Yeah.
How to write academic.
Right.
But in our, and I'm talking about other places that I'm teaching.
Yes.
And then you expect them to be certain way, and study and write essays in certain ways.
Yeah.
That's so foreign to
That's
them.
right.
Yeah.
And so how do we address that is going to be the issue. But what have you found works for you, some of the teachers? What's that?
We don't teach the degree students.
Well, you don't have to. I mean, as you teach any of the students, how have you helped them develop good study skills, or how do you help them to read more?
Well, we're teaching them in their own language.
Yep.
And make them have a better understanding because that's their language.
Their language, their heart language. Yep, good point.
as a tutor, also building in space for students to be able to do those conversations.
Yes, to have those conversations. Okay. Give examples. Yeah, model. It's modelling in class, but also giving examples. Don't just say write a review, but tell them here's an example of a review, and these are the key elements of a review, or whatever. Remembering again that our students are on a journey. We are privileged to share with them for some of that, and what are the skills that we're going to give them, not just for their time with us, but skills that they will be able to take on with them for lifelong learning, recognising that there's no one-size-fits-all category, recognising that they come to us with different learning agendas, why they're studying at the college here, how their study fits in with their life goals, what they're hoping to achieve, what they hope to gain from each course. We always like to think, and how important each course is to them. We always like to think that our course is the most important one they will ever do, but alas, they don't always come with that same perspective. And the reason why they're doing the course might be simply because they have to do it to complete the course. They're not much interested in it. They don't want to do it, but they have to do it. Whereas others may be more inherently interested in that. There's something in them that say, hey, I want to do that course. It's going to help me. So students come to our classes with a wide range of perspectives in terms of why, different agendas in terms of why they are there. But as we keep in mind that the areas of relevance and immediacy are going to be ways in which we start to help them develop a sort of an attitude that will help them with their study skills and help them with their reading. But again, remembering that we need to avoid a one-size-fits-all policy or approach in what we're doing. As we think about study skills, part of the bigger picture is to think of what are some of the things I hope that you can affirm about learning at the Bible College here. That these will be a foundation for building the skills into the students. The first one is that the study of students here is part of the larger goal of transforming God's people, the students, for lifelong impact. So that's the first thing we would want to affirm, that the study is part of the larger goal of transforming God's people for lifelong impact. Secondly, we would want to affirm that the ultimate teacher or enabler is the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth. Thirdly, that learning is a holistic, a whole of life, a whole of person activity, not just trying to impact on the cognitive, but we need to recognize that we're wanting to shape them and form them as whole people, their character, their skills, their passion, and the like. That learning is a social activity. It's not just students coming as individuals and getting it and then going away, but rather areas like interdependence, depending on each other. The students need us as teachers, we need them, the students need each other. They need to work together. Collaboration is important, and interdependence on each other for growing into maturity in Christ, of which their Bible college training, what they're spending with us, is a part of that. How do we recognize that? If we affirm that, how does it work out? Fifthly, students need to take responsibility for their study and learning. That we are not a failure necessarily if the student fails. If the students can't manage their time, if they don't take responsibility for their learning, we can't. And so we need to affirm that ultimately the students have to take responsibility for their learning. We will do whatever we can to work with them, but it's not our responsibility totally for the students to learn. And that can be a little bit liberating at times, that if a student just doesn't achieve in our course, we need to look and say, well, what could I have done differently? But ultimately, if we see there are factors there, that the student's been their own worst enemy, for example, we need to get that off our shoulder and not own that personally. And then, of course, the affirmation that not everyone learns alike. So, in the light of that, how do we help them develop good study skills that will help them with the courses we teach, as well as helping them to become lifelong learners. Remember that I mentioned before that they come to their learning with a number of different elements, the context of the learning situation, their prior learning experiences, what they understand by the study they're doing, their orientation to study, their orientation to learning, the approach they bring to that, and then that will impact on the outcomes in their lives. But it seems that when we talk about developing good study skills, it's built on, and especially for students with limited formal education, but not just them, two things. One will be motivation. What is their motivation for studying? And if we can enhance the motivation, then the study skills are more likely to follow. And with that then is also priority. What priority are they able to give to their study program? I've been involved in setting up and seeing through to completion the first Master of Theology course for Pakistan. A seminary in Pakistan has been offering the first in-country Master of Theology course. And we've had about 16 students in the course. The graduation is coming up in about 3 weeks' time, and only 5 of them are completing their Master of Theologies. About 8 or 9 are going to get postgraduate diplomas because they've completed the coursework, but they haven't done the research component at the end. And for almost all of those who are going to end up with the postgraduate diploma, they have just not allocated the time needed to that component of their program. Once the coursework was over, where they had assignment deadlines and participating on campus, they had so many demands in their ministry schedules, there just wasn't that hunger to complete the Master of Theology. So many other ministry things impinged on them that they just haven't completed it. Their priorities were not to finish. Now, we could, in terms of motivation, we tried to motivate them. We tried to help them take greater priority, but they ultimately were their own problems in terms of not taking responsibility, that they were not sufficiently motivated, they were not able to give it sufficient priority. So the more that we can encourage the students to be motivated, and the more we can encourage them then to give priority to their studies, the more likely they will succeed, and the more likely they will want to develop the skills to be able to finish well. What might some of these ideas be? Well, first of all, start where they're at. Make sure that we're recognising where they're coming from in terms of their educational level, their educational background, and where they're starting their journey with us. At what level of schooling? Is it tertiary? Is it secondary? What is their understanding of what education is about? Is it about just soaking up information? Is it about processing, or the like? What sort of learning is going to be expected? And to find out where they are, and so that we can build on that as we move on. Don't expect them to be at a level that they're not when they come to us. And so that takes some careful listening in the courses we teach. What's their knowledge of language? If they're doing languages, what's their prior language learning? What prior language learning have they done? Have they learnt a second language? Have they picked it up? In terms of theology, what thinking have they already done? Can we help them to see that they've already been doing theology? May not be formal, but they've been thinking God's thoughts. They've been trying to think how God and the world and people fit together. So we want to assure them that their prior learning experiences in life, whether they're formal or informal, actually are important, that what they come with is going to be important, and that the skills that they've acquired through those experiences will most likely help them in their study here. An example, you might get 1 or 2 mothers with young children who come through. And they've had the experience of having the children, but then having to run a household. They've had to manage finances, they've had to manage time, prioritise. And we can say, look, what those skills that you've got, they're going to stand you in good stead. You're also going to have to prioritise. You're going to have to work out how you put in time and energy when there are so many other demands on your life. And the skills you've got bringing up your family are the similar sorts of skills you can apply into your aspects of your Bible college study. And so we can say, look, those skills that you've acquired aren't going to be wasted, that we can build on those in what you're doing. If people are involved in the business world in some way and have been involved in focus groups or discussions, staff discussions or the like, recognise that. Say, hey, those are important skills that you can use, that we're going to use, so that you can discuss with your fellow students and the topics that we're covering in our course. Nothing is going to be wasted. And also to assure them that the skills they learn in their journeys, in their studies, will most likely help them on their life journeys. So we can enhance lifelong learning by giving them the skills to learn for themselves, encouraging them how to learn, equipping them with a growth mindset. Those are the ideas that we had in our earlier session. And to enhance lifelong learning, those are skills for learning to study effectively. Again, developing good study skills. An approach I have found in terms of helping them is to adopt a next step attitude. In other words, what will my students benefit from to enable them to move to the next step in their learning? That in terms of what skills do they need to move from here, not to the end of the course, but to the next step in the course. So if you see your course as being a number of steps towards an outcome at the end, what are some of the things that you can do as you move through the course to help the students move in their thinking, in their ability to process material in a number of ways as they go through the course. So you would deal with this by having varied course expectations and processes, building in variety into your course processes. That what you will do is say, well, we'll have a number of expectations in the course that some people might achieve at one level, other students might achieve at a different level. Especially when you've got a combination of student abilities in the class. Some are doing diploma, some are doing certificate, some might be doing a higher level subject. So recognise also that to help them develop their skills to see that learning is beyond solely the cognitive gains, what they gain in terms of content, but how they apply it. That there will be some who come to us who, if we help them see how they can apply it, then they're more likely to want to research that. What are they going to do in the next month, or when they go into a particular situation in their church? What are they going to do? And they're more likely then to do some digging. Perhaps you might encourage them to go and talk to one or two church leaders on the topic, rather than expecting them to write a paper. So you're building in a range of possibilities for them to help them move to the next step in their thinking, whatever it is. You'll have some students who are really excited about the academic component. Encourage that. Recognise there are some for whom the academics are not so important, but the actual application is going to be important. They're in the same class. Give variety to encourage the different possibilities for the perspectives, the priorities that the students bring to doing your particular course at this particular time. Build in intentional skills acquisition and enhancement, and with that, modelling and giving examples are essential. Those are the points that were raised earlier on. Building an intentional skills acquisition and enhancement is actually saying now, in this particular session, we're going to look at ways in which we might be able to, exegete a passage of the New Testament. And you may well model it, you might go through it as the teacher, then give them an example, which they do either in class or at home, but you intentionally show them the steps that you have gone through, so that they're picking up the steps, they see the steps, they're developing the skill themselves. They've got that takeaway of the steps to use to be able to go through that process in terms of, say, exegeting a passage, thinking about an issue, looking at an aspect of church history that might relate to issues that people are facing today. So, and then modelling is important, giving examples. Giving examples in terms of the content, giving examples in terms of assignments. Don't just say in your course, in your course outline, write a review. What's a review? What are the elements of a review? Or write a paper, a 1,200 word paper on such and such. What are the elements that you are wanting in that? And you want to see an introduction to the theme. You identify the topic. How are you going to approach it? What are the 3 main points you're going to cover? So you're giving a clear outline of what you're looking for, and when you come to marking it, you'll have rubrics, or you'll have a way of marking it that the students see. They will see what you're looking for in the assignment. And they know that when they get their mark back, that's been marked on the basis that, and that's what we were going to do in the assessment session. They say, well, what are you looking for in assignments? Give clear guidance for the assignments. Give an example if you can. Show clearly what you're going to be assessing for. So those there would be 3 key areas to keep in mind when you come to try to develop study skills. But there's one area that 3 areas actually for us to think about. One area in particular is in terms of developing critical thinking, and what you're going to see I'm going to call constructive thinking in a moment. Using questions effectively. How do we use questions? One area that we're not going to have time for is learning to evaluate sources, especially from the internet, but you have got a page in your handout called Evaluating Internet Resources, which I've given, and that gives just some idea if you want to help students evaluate the resources they use, especially resources from the internet. And then the next area, moving from learning to reflection, and we'll try to look at 2 or 3 of those in the next few minutes. But I want to take up particularly the area of critical or constructive thinking. I've actually called it, I prefer to call it thinking constructively rather than thinking critically. We talk about developing critical reflection or critical analytical ability in students, but the word critical tends to throw people. It means to be, how can you be negative? What are the negative things you pick up? Whereas what we're really asking is, how can you help students to think constructively about an issue or about what they see? It's to do with informed thinking. Or one person, it's reasonable, reflective thinking focused on deciding what to believe or do. Or it's about encouraging people to think for themselves, and think for themselves whatever their academic level. And so critical thinking is not just for the academically more capable, more competent, but it's actually for everybody to think, what are you making of this? What's there? How do you think for yourselves? Let me give an example of that. On your handout, you've got that there. What do you see? What do you see there? Should be there in your handout towards the back. What do you see? Yeah, okay. What happens if you sort of fold the page a little around and sort of look down it with your eyes? Or turn it around and do the same. Do you discover anything? Can anybody see? Can anybody see? This is a brand new way of looking at things. Or this is yet another new way of looking at it. Close one eye and just bend it a little and see what you can see as you look down the page. Yeah, what have you got there?
This is a brand new way of looking at
Things, yeah. And, okay. And if you, okay, here's another way of doing the same thing. So, this is really just an example of what critical or constructive thinking is about. Often our students will be presented with something, and they may or may not make much sense of it, but our task is to actually help them to see what's there, and there might be more than one. There might be more than one thing. There are a good half dozen or so different things here. Our task to encourage students in their study skills is to encourage them to do the thinking, taking something, looking at it from different angles, different perspectives, and seeing what they make of it, and then what they're going to do with what they have discovered. That's what constructive thinking is about. And so key elements of constructive thinking, what we want to encourage our students to do are things like, how do they identify the position that other people bring to a particular topic? Why do Methodists, why do Methodists and Anglicans, what do they say about infant baptism that the Baptists and the Brethren can't agree with? Why do the Salvation Army not celebrate communion? What are some of at the higher level? Why are there the different theories of the atonement, or scholarship in terms of writing? To people who wrote the Pentateuch, different aspects of biblical studies. That what we are wanting to help people to see is that how do they identify that other people's positions on topics or on perspectives? How do they evaluate the evidence? What is stronger? Which is stronger than other evidence? How do you weigh up the different approaches to what's being said on the topic or on the interpretation of Bible passages, hermeneutics and the like, seeing below or behind the surface what appears on the surface, but actually what's underlying the issue. Often the problem underneath is different to what's presented. To recognise techniques that are used for people to put their case in writing. Are they passionate but without evidence? Are they strong on some evidence? They're ignoring other evidence. Synthesizing, bringing information together, drawing their own conclusions, and then presenting a convincing point of view. That's what constructive thinking is about. And it doesn't have to be all done at the higher academic level. We can encourage students at all levels to do appropriate thinking in this way, to construct their own understanding, their own perspective of topics, of issues. And so we want to encourage them in that. And that's going to lead to that deeper learning that we have been talking about. How do we encourage deeper learning? Well, it's going to be to encourage students to think more critically, more constructively about the particular topics and things we're teaching. How do we do that? Well, first of all, we will model it. We model what we want the students to be able to do. We model constructive thinking in the way that we teach. We explain, for example, how we have come to our position on issues. Instead of just saying, this is the position you ought to adopt, and this is the position I adopt, to say, well, how have you come to that position? I've looked at this, and I've looked at that, and I think that it seems that this point here fits Scripture better than another one. And so you're intentionally modelling for the students how you have come to your conclusions so that they can see the processes that you've gone through. One of the big problems for those who have higher education, doctorates and the like, is that we tend to assume that students have done a lot of the thinking that we have done. And so we tend to pitch far too high, and we don't recognise that we have to come right back here and help them to see the steps that we have come to get to this position. One of the best bits of advice or comments that I heard as I completed my doctoral studies in Christian education, and my supervisor, I think it was the supervisor, said, well, Allan, it'll probably take 7 to 10 years before you can teach effectively. And he was right. Probably not 7 to 10, but probably 4 or 5 years. Because when I still recollect with some horror and embarrassment going into the classroom and some of my first classes, I was really giving them the content, a lot of the content and process of what I had picked up from 3 years of full-time doctoral studies, and failed to recognise that they hadn't done any of that. And they were way back here. But I was sort of dropping this on them and wondered why they were looking stunned and unconvinced and not quite sure what was going on. But after about 5 years, I cut down my expectations. I cut down the amount of content. I focused much more on saying, hey, the students are here. How do I get them to the next step in their journey in, for example, Christian education topics, spiritual formation, discipleship, and the like? So explain how you've come to your position on issues. Give clear instructions for activities and assignments so that you help them in the process. You help them to see what is expected in their study, in their reading, for example. We'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. And in the assessment rubrics, give them an idea of how you're going to mark the assignments. What are you looking for in the assignment? So tell them what you're looking for in terms of the content, and then say, and when I mark it, these are the criteria I'm going to use. And there's lots of help out there available in terms of developing appropriate assessment rubrics. Generally, more often than not, they'll relate back to your learning outcomes for the course, and so make sure that your assignments relate to measuring learning for the learning outcomes of the course, but then help students to see that for each assessment assignment, this is what you're going to be looking for. And then help students to recognise different areas of learning, academically, spiritual development, ministry formation, and like recognise those different areas are there. That when they come to their thinking, that there are different areas that we're wanting them to look at. I know some of you in your courses have referred to Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom talks about different levels of learning, from the basic level, remembering. So you've got content, you remember it, you can regurgitate it if you want to, up through understanding, showing that you understand it, you can restate it. Perhaps you can put it in your own words, you're showing you understand it. Applying it, showing that you've got that, and you can apply it into life situations, and then the areas of creating, evaluating, and analysing as sort of a higher order, higher level ways of showing that you are learning. And so, as teachers, be aware of the different learning domains and help the students see, well, what are you looking for? Do you want them to learn this information? Do you want them to understand it? Do you want them to be able to synthesize it with other learning that they're doing? How does what you're doing in this course in theology relate to what you've done in church history? And that's often a good example of where, if you can get someone from another discipline, a faculty member from another discipline, to come and say, well, you've been teaching a course on an aspect of, say, theology, eschatology or the like, and then get a church history person to come in and say, yeah, and this, as we think about this, these are some of the elements in church history that have related to this and how people in the past have had to deal with the issue. And so you're helping the students see, it's not new. There are other ideas that people have wrestled with over a period of time. How do we actually bring it together? And so that there will be some of the ways to enhance critical or constructive thinking. To do that, you're going to need to change your approach. If you have adopted the sort of sage on the stage, content-driven approach, you'll need to see that if you're going to develop and enhance constructive thinking, then you're going to need to move much more to the guide on the side process, where you're actually facilitating the learning in the students, helping them get the skills. That's going to be more important. That's what's going to prevent the problem of those students in Sarawak after 5 years dropping out of ministry because they can no longer use their Bible college notes as the words for their sermons. You've actually given them the skills to think more effectively, to keep on going and write their own sermons and write their own Bible studies later on, regardless of the notes that they now don't have or have been eaten by woodworm or whatever, been lost in a flood. So that's the area of enhancing constructive thinking. I think that's one of the key things for effective study skills, helping our students to think more effectively. Any comments or questions on that? Practicalities? Yeah, Dennis.
Challenges that I had sort of thought about and again and how to present the material is really with many people for whom English is a second language.
Yes, yeah.
And it's hard enough for people for whom English is their principal language to do all the things that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I know.
And therefore, I have felt motivated to actually provide the very best notes that I feel that I can
Yes.
provide with illustrations and stuff like that. And then to the extent that there's time, because time is a real factor, to talk about some of these things in like a group discussion. Often we don't have enough time to do that. And so there's almost not the luxury of giving them more time to sort of develop.
Process it, yeah. Yeah, I know. And we'll talk about that a little bit, I hope, in terms of time and how we get them to, how we use the time that's available with them. But again, it usually is if we recognise that for reasons of language difficulties, or it can often be prior educational experiences, that we're not getting through the material. Do we sort of just say, well, you guys are going to have to work harder, this is what I have to get through? Or do you actually cut down the amount of material and change your expectations for the course? Now, you may not be able to do it very much for this particular run of the course, but certainly for the next one, to cut back, as I did after I got my doctorate and went teaching in Singapore. That was English and an English medium, and most of them were reasonable. But I had to realise that my expectations for the course were pitched far, far too high. And they didn't have the time. They couldn't put in they needed more hours than were available for the course, just because they needed to do a lot more reading and processing.
Have you done any research or thinking, I'm interested in feedback, on Edward de Bono and the 6 colour hats of thinking?
I know of de Bono and the coloured hats. I haven't come across de Bono for years now, but that there is helpful. De Bono's work.
It's a tool that does help people identify learning
Yes.
styles. Another tool that I've used in the classroom has, of course, been the Myers-Briggs to find out their particular learning styles.
Yeah.
And then tie it in,
Yeah.
auditory, a visual.
Yeah, that's right.
So there are tools available.
Yeah.
It's just a case of knowing who to ask. and who to give.
Yeah, that's right. And those sorts of tools are helpful for students. Some of the learning styles. There's one called VARK, V-A-R-K, which is quite a good one to use. And at the beginning of a semester, it could well be worth the college thinking about getting all the students to go undertake the VARK inventory, the VARC test, do it and feed the results back and see what the students make of those. And that will help the students say, well, okay, I'm going to need to do more. I learn best by listening rather than writing or whatever. For us as teachers to recognise that and build in variety. And so that and Colin's and Dennis's ideas of, you've got people, time runs out, it's a luxury to do some of this. Well, what's going to be appropriate as I sense what sort of students I've got at this particular time for this particular course? And your courses aren't accredited, are they, at this stage? Only the degree one. The other ones, it means that for now, you can actually do more of this without having to worry about accreditation standards. Provided you have an agreed level among the faculty of this is sort of where you're generally pitching, but you're not answerable to at this stage to an accreditation authority. And that can be a very positive thing, especially in terms of seeking to build in, not just the academic stuff, but the spiritual development and the like, to build well-rounded graduates who are going to go out and impact their churches, who will then impact their society. Asking questions is another skill, and I'd like to touch on that as a skill that we can build in our preparation in terms of helping students in their study program to know what sorts of questions to ask. Do you know different sorts of questions to ask when you read an article or process ideas? What are examples of the sorts of questions to ask when you read an article or process ideas? What's the difference between those two questions? Do you see a difference between the sort of questions that are being asked there? Yeah, the first one is very much a yes, no. Do you know? Yes, you do. No, I don't. Where the second one asks you more for examples. And this is one of the frameworks for questions, is that you've got open questions and you've got closed questions. Closed are the ones that rely on just a 1 or 2 word answer, yes or no. Open questions lead to more information, wanting more information. Then you've got another way of asking questions between a thought-based question and an experience-based question. What do you think about, or what's the key idea here? As a thought-based question. How do you relate to that in a real life situation? Is much more an experience-based question. Now, if you look at that there, you can ask open or closed questions, thought or experience type questions, and each of those are going to give different sorts of answers, which are going to help the thinking processes of the students. Keep that in mind. In fact, on the last, towards the end there, I think you should have that there. Oh yes, you've got that on one of the pages, a framework for asking questions. There's another one too, which develops this a little bit more, and this is where you have to put your thinking caps on. Here are a number of questions. You've got, get your handout because you'll need this, a wide range of questions. You've got these sorts of questions. Why do I want to know something? What do I want to know? How do I know it? Why? When or where or how or who or what? What happens if? Or what if? Or what would happen if? So those are a number of different question forms, and they can actually meet different purposes. One may be what we call speculative questions. It's not really the reality, but if it were, how might we answer it? Or some sorts of questions are used to identify our assumptions, what we assume, what the foundation is. Some questions are designed to clarify what you want to discover, and how to search then for that. Other questions are cause and effect type questions. Something leads to another. Another sort of question looks at the sources of your knowledge and how reliable that knowledge is. Some other questions are used for information. Some other questions are used for simply generating ideas around a topic. Now, what I've given you there is 1 to 7 and A to G, but 1 doesn't correspond to A and 2 doesn't correspond to B, and it's your task over the next 3 minutes or so, with somebody else if you like, is to link up which of the numbers relate to which of the lettered ones. Go to it. So, why do I want to know is what sort of question from A to G. What do I want to know? See how you go. You see if you can link the lines.
Allan, one of the things, the tools I've used, particularly when teaching scripture, is what I call a 3-question approach.
Yes.
First thing is, what does it say?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's your low.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Next question is, what does it mean?
Yeah.
And that requires a greater level of understanding of language, context, history.
Yeah.
And then the last question which takes it is, what's it saying to me to do and how do I respond?
Right.
That's a very, very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Get those 3.
I
Yeah.
mean, it encapsulates those
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So, what does it say? What does it mean? How do I
Yeah.
respond?
Yeah. How are you going? For Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, 3:15? So it's hard going, but we're just about there. Okay, let's see how we've gone with those, shall we? Because these are, if you as the teachers, if you're doing your own study, recognise different sorts of questions that you can ask. Planning your questions, planning your key questions in a class is actually very important. Don't just rely on them off the top of your head, but if you're going to ask questions to get students' responses, then think, well, what sort of questions should I be asking them? What do I want them to be thinking about? So if we were going to ask the sort of question, what do I want, why do I want to know something, what would that relate to? Why do I want to know? 1 would relate to which of the letters A to G? C. Yeah. And that will be important at the start of a course, perhaps. Yeah, why do you want to know about something? And that sort of question is one that will help to clarify what they want to discover, and then that will lead to how to search for it. How will we, if that's what we want to discover, or why we want to know something, then how will we go about searching for it? What are the tools that we might have for that? What do I want to know relates to F, that one. And that's quite straightforward. What do I want to know? What do I need to know? What's the information I need? How do I know that something? How do I know a theory, or how do I know E? Yep, E for that, the sources of your knowledge, whether they are reliable or not. How do I know that how can I trust the Bible? Is that sort of question. And then you look at, well, what resources do you have to help understand that you can say that the Bible is reliable, and at what level of certainty you can say that. The why question. Yeah, it tends. That's the assumptions one. Why is something so, or why do I think it's the assumptions that underlie the knowledge that you're looking at. When, where, how, who, and what questions really designed to brainstorm, generate ideas. G. What happens if? It could be A, or it's more likely D, cause and effect. If this, then what happens if I change some sort of effect? And then, of course, that leaves us with the speculative question, what if, or what would happen if, which is a bit more distant. But if this were the case, if there were an earthquake in the next 10 minutes, what would we do? Well, that's I don't know how speculative that is for Wellington. It's a bit more speculative for Auckland, of course, but it tends to be a little bit more distant. But it's thinking about possibilities further out there. And so, being aware of questions, whether you think of that framework of questions, or this framework, or some combination of those, build in good questions to encourage constructive thinking in your students. Using questions effectively, like this, move around them. Start with the more basic questions and move to what we would call the higher order ones, question forms, but use a variety of questions as you encourage students to interact with the material. And it might be material in class, what you're doing in class. It might be when they're going to read, you encourage them to read. Don't just say, go and read this, but when you give them readings, say what sort of reading you want them to do, and say, look, when you read those articles this week, ask these questions. And so when they come back to class, they come with answers to those questions from the article or the whatever you have got them to do over that week. Get the students to generate questions. To say, look, we're going to look at a particular topic. What are the sorts of questions we should be asking to be able to delve into the topic and to think about it and see the different ways of looking at it. You may find in some situations that, especially when it comes to biblical material, that the students might say, well, why should we ask questions? Don't we already know the answers? Isn't it already in the Bible? And that's where we need to say, well, yes, it is in the Bible, but there are different ways. People come with different ways of looking at the Bible, handling the Bible, using the Bible, and the questions are being given to us by God. God's made us questioning beings to be able to make sure that we look at it appropriately. And so we look at the Bible not just at face value, but we do some of the digging. What do you see? And help the students with this. So we may have to respond to students who say, well, why should we ask questions? Isn't it all there? You just tell us what's there, and we'll believe it. So you may have to confront that particular question in some form or another. And then make sure that your approaches to questioning, using questions, are appropriate, culturally appropriate. It may not be so appropriate to ask students to say, now, what do you think about something? But what do those around you think about? Or to get students in a small group of 2 or 3 people to talk about something, and then say, now what's one idea that's come out of your group? So they can more easily share what's one idea that's come out of the group rather than what they think, which can be a bit daunting. It's also, if you're giving students work to do between classes, or you've got a topic coming up next week, to say to the students, look, this coming week, before you come to class, talk to two people or ask two people outside the Bible college, ask two people this question. And next week when you come back, tell us what the answers are that they gave. And so, they're out doing a little bit of mini field research and getting ideas that they can then come, and they've got something to pull when they come into your class, and you can then build on that when you are developing the idea in your class. So look for culturally appropriate ways to get responses to questions. And help the students in some way to realise that the only dumb question is the question they don't ask. There are no dumb questions to encourage questioning, but to do it in an appropriate way. And then finally, good study skills will result and also be better formed as we encourage students move from learning to reflection. Theological reflection really is a key to discipleship and ministry and mission formation and integration as we help our students to process theology in life, theology in ministry. It's to help them to integrate their theological or theoretical theology, integrate it with their practical expressed or what's called espoused theology. The actual common theology in many of our churches, many Christians, which they hold, is quite different to what they would say they believe. They believe this, but their actual practice shows that they don't believe it at all. One example would be, we might stand up and sing, we probably don't in churches now, but this world is not my home, I'm just a passing through, my treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. So we sing that happily in church, or used to, but you know full well that the conversation over coffee after church is how the stocks and shares have done over the past week because they've taken a tumble, or interest rates on mortgages and on houses are not available, or whatever. And so theological reflection is about encouraging to integrate what we say our theology is with how we actually demonstrate our theology in practice. It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, helping the students to fit the different parts of the puzzle together, and recognizing, of course, that everything has a theological dimension, that the whole of life has a theological dimension, that God's in the whole of life, and we encourage our students to see that for themselves, and we give them the skills to be able to get them to go and help those they are discipling and working with and seeking to bring to faith and the like, helping them as they do that with others to make that impacting on their churches, so the churches can impact on their societies. So encourage theological reflection. It's a bit like action. We want them to think, to act, and then to reflect on it, and to keep going on acting, reflecting, acting, reflecting. And we do that as we go through the courses and as they go through their time with us. And so we model it. We model theological reflection in our course processes. We do it in class. We do it as we give students out-of-class learning activity over this next week. See if you can find 20 minutes one day or 2 days to reflect on this. Just take time to think about what we've talked about today. When you come back next week, let's talk about what you discovered, what you thought, how you reflected on that. So those are 3 areas to help develop good study skills. Develop constructive thinking skills, critical thinking skills, use questions effectively, and help our students move from learning to reflection. There's no need to feel like this. We can actually encourage our students to keep developing in those areas. In terms of reflection, an article which you may appreciate is this one by Professor Brian Hill from Western Australia, Do Theological Studies Foster Spirituality? And in this article, he talks about the place of theological studies and spirituality growing in our faith as we go through theological studies. This will be helpful for teachers. This will be helpful for you as students also to think about how do you merge your study program with your growing spirituality, your growing spiritual formation. So take a copy of that. It's well worth a read and a reflective time on that. There are two things there. One is, I don't know if you have some sort of an orientation to study at Wellington, at WPBC, when students first come in. But it's often good to do an initial orientation course of some sort for new students and to offer that regularly. But then, during your courses, as time goes on, take opportunities to actually stop and interact with the students on what skills they are needing in your particular course, and sort of work through that with them and say, now, how are you going with this? And find out where there might be gaps, help them to understand a bit better. So part of it, there can well be a block at the beginning of their program or at the beginning of a course, but then look for opportunities to drip feed ideas in as you go through the course. As you're explaining assignments, for example, take time to explain what you're looking for in assignments. That will be part of the study skills development process, and what they look for in terms of what's going to be assessed, how it's going to be assessed. When it comes to reading, we don't have time to look at reading, but don't just say, we want you to read an article. Be much more directive than that. What sort of reading? Do you want them to read an article to scan it to get an idea of the main idea? Do they need to go into great depth in it? So don't just assume that, don't just tell them, read an article. Tell them what you're looking for when you want them to do some reading. And so you're guiding them, directing them much more. They will appreciate that. And you'll end up getting, I think, better responses from the students as a result of giving them that direction. Yeah. We're not going to do reading, but we are going to take just a few minutes, probably about 10 minutes, to get into groups, small groups of about 4 people, and take it won't be 15 minutes, but it'll be about 10 minutes. In that group, say, what's dominant in your mind from what we've been doing in today's sessions? So thinking through from what started at 9:30 or so, what's dominant in your mind from today's sessions? Secondly, thinking of yourself as a more effective teacher for another 5 minutes. What aspects of today's sessions reinforce how I already teach, or in what areas do I sense I need to enhance? And you've got those. Yes, you've got those on page 7 of your notes. But 10 minutes in groups of about 4 people. So move your chairs where you are. You don't need to move elsewhere, but move into groups. Make them a little bit bigger than they were before. Groups of 4. We'll use those 4s before we finish. They can just move their chairs around where they are, I think, rather than moving away. Yeah, they won't speak too loud. So aim for groups of about 4. There's a 3 over there, Colin, if you want that. 3 or 4. 3's okay. 3 or 4. 5's probably too big. But yeah. Okay. Stay with your 5. Yeah. Okay, so 5 minutes, what's dominant in your mind from today's sessions? And then secondly, for 5 minutes, what aspects of today's sessions reinforce how you already teach? What areas do you sense you need to enhance? Make sure you move to the next slide also. One more minute.
I get as much encouragement in what you do. One of the things I take away from here is this was given by the church was so angry about the leadership. We certainly think to those, I have a fellowship with them, lovely people, and I see up there, there's a real hunger of maybe it's because this is sensitive himself. Maybe it's because there was a thing that we got work to do. God is with us, so we can go and do it. And like the seven churches that you read about in Revelation, there are some that got cold, there are some who have lost their reputation. But I see that here.
Round off your discussion, but stay in your groups. Well, we're going to bring things to a close, but stay on your groups, as I said. We've been looking today at this area of transformation, learning for transformation. Stay in your groups. We're going to use those groups again just in a moment. We've covered the area of learning, teaching for transformation, what impact means, what it means in terms of understanding our students, what it means for us as teachers, as facilitators of transformative learning. We've done some thinking about developing student study skills. And there's a lot there and a lot to take away and continue to process on, not just by yourselves, but collaboratively. Keep the collaborative process going. At the beginning, I asked you to just jot down what you hoped for from today, and I'd like you to just revisit that and not necessarily sharing it with others, but have you had that hope fulfilled, or have there been some surprises? And while it may not have been that, yet it might have been something else that was totally unexpected, but you're glad that you've been here. Revisit that, and I hope that no one goes away disappointed from today. I would like you to take a few moments, though, to consciously and bring God into the final part of what we do. And so I'd like you to stay in those groups that you're in, and find a bit of spare space in the middle of there, and take out a common object that you have on you. I mean, it could be a pen, a phone, a piece of paper, or just a common object, nothing spiritual or anything like that, and place it in the middle of the group where the group members can see it. So a common object, each of you make sure there's no duplicates, and put it in the middle of the group where all of you can see the 4 or 3 or 5 items. You'll have to join a group if you want to do this, Dennis. And you're going to take a minute or so of silent reflection, looking at those silently, pondering their look, their feel, their source, their usefulness, those 4 items, and you might focus on 1 or 2 or more of them each, and let God speak to you as you quietly look at those and think about them. Let God speak to you about what it means to be a more effective WPBC teacher or a student or involved in teaching in some other aspect. And then after a minute of silent reflection, I'll get you in your groups to pray together, and not all aloud at the same time, but one after the other, but in your group, to pray together about some of your thoughts and your insights. So take about a minute, silently ponder what those 4 or 5 items are, what they look like, what they feel like, what they're used for. Let God speak to you as you quietly look at those. And then when I say pray now, then in your group, have a few minutes of prayer in your group. So silence to begin with. So in your groups, pray together, pray around some of your thoughts and insights. So round off in your small groups. And as we finish, I invite us to pray and to bid each other well as we go from here into our ongoing ministries and mission and ministry through teaching here at Wellington Pacific Bible College and in other situations. So let's stand, shall we? And let's say this to one another, even though you're reading this with the words from the screen. So may the Father who loves us, the Son who sends us, the Spirit who empowers us, be with us and bless us wherever we are, whatever we do, whoever we're with, to his praise and glory. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Allan. Yes, I think it's appropriate that we clap, and just on behalf of the teachers and students and principal, Allan, thank you so much for making the trip down from Auckland. And you worked with my dad many years ago, and here you are with me. So that's a tiny bonus for you, I suppose. And Aseta just wants to give you a little thing and express her thanks as well. So I'll give you over to Aseta.
Allan, Dr. Allan Harkness, on behalf of the board and the faculty and all the teachers, the college, I would like to present you these two envelopes. The one from the board and the one from all of us, the sign card there. The sign card is a gift from us so that you can buy a gift to remind yourself of a great day today, because we did not know what you appreciated the most. So we thought it's best to give it to you for you to do that. You know, a small gift compared to all what you've done for the Wellington Pacific Bible College for the years to come. So, Allan, you have blessed us. I don't know about you, but for me, I was very blessed today. See, not only you come all the way from Auckland, but in the midst of a pandemic to come down, but behind the scene preparation and prayers. Training our faculty is now a very big thing in my mind. And I think the time God is bringing to me, and this is the first one. And I'm so grateful that you do that now. And may God richly bless you and your family. And I am hoping for you to come back. And have a safe trip. Please join with me in clapping again, and stand and clap for a wonderful session. Thank you. I also want to say thank you so much to you all for giving up your Saturday and come here to learn. Thank you so much for that. I also would like to thank our MC, Pastor Andrew Penhy, for stepping in David Cashmore's shoes, not only in doing other things like the technology and many other things that you know. So thank you so much, Andrew. But I also would like to thank David Cashmore. He's not with us, but he's the one who prepared this whole thing and by consultation with Allan. So we want to thank him for too. But also want to thank Colin and the team. I put them on the spot just like that because we didn't know that they're almost not going to come, but they did well. Thank you for that. But I also want to thank Peng Yai. She's one of our Samoan teachers, but she's been doing all this work from yesterday and today in feeding us. So remember also her in prayers. But thank God, thank the Holy Spirit. I don't know about you, but I felt the Holy Spirit teaching us today through Allan. So we give him praise and honor and glory. Thank you.
One of the things I didn't mention was that you have got my email address, phone number too. But if you do want to continue to interact on issues, then feel free to contact me. And we can continue a conversation either individually or in some other way. So if you have got questions or concerns, then don't hesitate to either email